of the formula, D equals RT. I cannot believe in 2 hours of class I have not had at least one person raise their hand. Your science teachers I know have talked to you about the distance equals rate times time. No. Oh my gosh, I'm going to have to talk to them. Yeah. Distance equals rate times time. Let me give you a breakdown of how simple this equation is. Write this on the top of your paper. That you can figure out the distance that you traveled if you know how fast you were traveling, for how long you were traveling. It's a basic science formula. Distance equals rate times time. So, in other words, if you have a formula with 3 variables and I give you the value for 2 of them, you know you can find the third, right? So if I say, hey, I got on 75, the highway, and I drove for 80 miles straight, at a rate of 25 miles an hour. First of all, I probably would have gotten a ticket because that is way too slow to be driving down the highway, right? It's pretty dangerous. But if I know these 2 things, I got on for 80 miles straight, I was driving like little residential area speed, how long was I driving for? You can figure that out easily, right? Yeah. You just fill in what you know. You know the distance that I traveled. You know the rate that I was traveling it at. I just don't know how long it took me. Okay? So this is a basic little baby 1-step equation. After I solve for this, I get 3.2 hours. Because I was driving for 80 miles per hour. Or actually, I drove for 80 miles at a rate of 80 miles per hour, which means my answer, it took me 3.2 hours. 3 hours and 0.2 of it. Doesn't mean, it's 20% of an hour. Okay? So, how would that change if I said, okay, I now drove 60 miles an hour? That would just mean that instead of 25, it would be 80 equals 60 t. And when I divide, I would cancel out my zeros, and I would have 8/6, which is equal to 4/3, which is equal to 1.3 repeating. I upped my speed to 60, and it only took me an hour and a third of the next hour. Okay? Does that make sense? Yeah. All right. So we're going to use this D equals RT formula, and you're going to tell your science teacher that your math teacher taught it to you. And we're going to talk about a canoe trip. Okay? So if you go on a trip, like Mr. Z went like whitewater rafting. I'll give it to you in a second, sweetie. Okay? So when you go on a trip to do an activity, you don't do that activity for the whole time, okay? So let's say we went on a 7-day trip, and it was a 90-mile canoe trip. Seems crazy. So there is this river somewhere down south. It's beautiful. People get in their canoes, and they just paddle along nice and slow. They pull over for lunch. They end at 6 at night. They go to their hotel. They have dinner. They get back on that canoe river, and they do it the next day, okay? I was traveling at a rate of 2.5 miles per hour. Nothing major. It's not like the rapids. I'm just cruising down this river, enjoying the scenery, right? Yes.
What's an 8? And why did you only put the parentheses on one side of the word 8?
I don't know what you're talking about.
See, top of 25 miles per hour.
Rate.
Oh, that looks like a parenthesis.
No, this is the rate that I'm traveling at, okay? So, a 7-day trip, a 90-mile canoe trip, and I'm traveling at this rate right here. So, I'm going to ask you, how many miles, I'm sorry, not miles, hours. How many hours was I not paddling? Meaning, how many hours was I not in the canoe? Okay? How many hours was I at the hotel, waking up, taking a shower, having breakfast, okay? So, first thing we have to do is figure out, if I'm looking for hours, I need to know how many hours my trip consisted of. How many hours is in one day? 24. So, how many hours is in 7 days, or are in 7 days? 168 hours, okay? From the time I pulled out of my driveway in the car to the time I pulled back in, 168 hours went by. I did not spend 168 hours on the river paddling, okay? But if I know these two things, I can figure out how many hours I was paddling for, right? So let's just ignore this for right now, and let's use our good old D equals RT. Distance equals rate times time. What was the distance of my trip? 90. What rate was I traveling down that river at? 2.5. Now, watch what I'm about to do. This is a two-part. If I find this, I will solve for T, and T will tell me how many hours I was in that canoe for. And if I know how many hours the total trip was, and I know how many I was canoeing for, what could I do to figure out how many I wasn't? I would subtract. Like, it's a simple thing. That's one way to do a multi-step problem. Figure out what it is, and then subtract it to find what they're asking you. Let's do that. Let's solve for T. Let's figure out how many hours I was in that canoe for. Out of a 168-hour trip, I spent 36, a day and a half in that canoe. Okay? So I want you to point to that, and that's the number of hours I was in the canoe paddling for. Right? I'm not done though, because it didn't ask how many hours was I paddling for. It said, how many were you not? Oh, okay, so you mean all I have to do is take that 168 and subtract that? So I had 132 hours that I was not paddling for. Did you follow that? Okay. I will ask for a show of hands, but the last test we took, that laundromat question, some giggles, that some of you put 90 for, but it didn't say how much did he spend. It said how much was remaining. This may not be a good option for you because you don't have a good track record at remembering to do things after the fact. So I have a solution for you. Are you ready? You build in this subtraction problem into the equation. And that way when you're done solving it, you're done. Your answer is your answer. You want to see how to do it? I know some of you do. Here is your solution. D equals R times T. Your distance is still 90. Your rate is still 2.5. You're still multiplying that rate times the time, except we're not going to use T for the time we spent. We're going to say there's a 168-hour trip, and if T is the time I spent paddling, I'm going to subtract that T from that 168 right in the problem. Okay? Now let's watch. 2.5 times this is 420 minus 2.5 T. You guys should be pretty comfortable with this step. I'm kind of cruising through this. What do you think I get if I divide 330 by 2.5? 132. And guess what? If you forget to do things, you're A-okay, because you do not have to do anything else because you built that not into your answer, okay? I got about 3 minutes. I'm going to show you one more problem. So let's say there's this, because I want to give you guys some time to work on these. One more example, and you can copy it if you want, or you don't have to. So there are some Canadian geese that were getting ready to migrate south for the winter, all right? And they went from Canada to Texas, okay? This is the geese problem. They went from Canada to Texas. It took them 14 days to get there. Okay? Canada to Texas is roughly 2,500 miles from where they started to where they landed. They were traveling at a rate of 25 miles per hour, an average rate. Here's my question. Did these geese for 14 days straight never stop to eat or rest? No, just like the canoers, they took a break. So my question is, how many hours were they not flying for? Option 1, find how many hours they were flying for and subtract. Oops, sometimes I don't remember to subtract, so let's build that in. So in order to build it in, I have to know, because this is hours, but they gave me the total trip in days. So how many hours is in 14 days? Good, thank you. And now I say my distance is equal to my rate times my time. What total distance did these little geese go? 2,500 miles. What rate were they traveling at on average? And if I just put T, that would give me the time that they were flying for. But I want the time that they weren't. So let's do what? Let's subtract that time in the problem instead of after the problem. Got it? 2,500 is equal to 8,400 minus 25t minus 8,400 gives you negative 5,900. This is the third time I've given these notes today. And if I figure this out, I get an answer of 236. This is the time they were not flying. How many hours was the total trip from the minute they shoved off to the minute they landed? 336 hours? They were not flying for this. So it only took them how long? In the air, were they? That's a pretty easy computation right there. 100, right? So they were flying for 100. Let's just confirm that that's right. If I were to take the distance and divide it by the rate, I should get 100. Okay? Does this make sense? Okay. So you're going to